Welcome back. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is asking a federal judge for a total dismissal of his criminal corruption case. Defense attorneys citing alleged misconduct by prosecutors, suggesting that the Justice Department engaged in a, quote, quid pro quo with the mayor to dismiss the case. The dismissal was done without prejudice, meaning re-indictment of any charge is possible. State lawmakers say Governor Hochul's guardrails to limit mayoral powers is, quote, dead on arrival, saying it's all for show. From the governor. Joining me now is the Peebles Corporation founder, chairman and CEO, Don Peebles. Don, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I know you're back and forth, New York, Florida. What do you take away from all of this?
A lot of chaos in New York City. New York City and New York State Democratic politics are in chaos. If you look at what's happened with the mayor, and then you follow that up with the governor, her own lieutenant governor announced the other day that he will not be running on her ticket, and he is setting up a campaign ultimately to run against her. I mean, that is astonishing. It would be the equivalent of a sitting vice president running against the president.
Do you want Hochul to remove Eric Adams?
No, absolutely not. And she doesn't even have the power to do it. It is a lengthy process. And in fact, she should have leveled with the public and explained that to them. She can accuse him of misconduct. It has to elevate to a level of illegal conduct in his official capacity, and then he gets the right to defend himself. It's an actual joke to be talking about it. And then the idea of her trying to limit his powers when she's probably weaker than him politically.
Yeah, I mean, does this impact your business? Walk us through what the impact is for citizens and in New York and the real estate industry.
Well, I think the real estate industry, the challenge we have is that the mayor lost 4 deputy mayors about a week or so ago. And so the challenge is leadership at the implementation phases of the government, be that in economic development, be that in land use, be that in human services that affects the general public, be that in public safety, and so many other areas. And so the challenge that the residents of the city and businesses have in New York right now is there's a void of leadership because the mayor's only one person. He's distracted both on his legal issues and political issues that he's got to confront coming up. And so it's a bit difficult to do business in New York right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, the mayor has come around to understand the impact of so much money going toward illegal migrants. Now a new 2,200 capacity all-male migrant shelter is opening in the Bronx. It happened last week. It just opened as Mayor Adams is vowing to close the emergency migrant intake center at Manhattan's Roosevelt Hotel. Adams is praising his handling of the migrant crisis. Here's what he said. Watch.
We have to use smart policies. How do we bring people into locations where we can get the services and move them out? When you think about it, out of those 230,000 that we've had, 70% are out of our care on to their next step. Great job on the part of this administration handling the largest humanitarian crisis we've had in this city's history.
I mean, Don, not just the migrant situation, but 1 in 4 New Yorkers say they cannot afford essentials like food and housing. The city's poverty level nearly doubled the national average in just 2 years. That's a report from Columbia University and anti-poverty group Robin Hood. Does it feel this way in New York from your standpoint?
Well, you know, what New York is an example of is failed policies. First of all, the open border policy of the last administration is the root of the cause of this migrant crisis. And that is why Donald Trump won such an overwhelming election or re-election returning to office. Adams welcomed migrants initially, and that was a big mistake. The reality is that we're spending over $6 billion a year in New York City to house illegal migrants, and we're cutting those dollars from New Yorkers who are needing assistance and for basic public services like public safety and other areas. And so, no, this migrant crisis has not been handled well. The way it's got to get handled is we got to stop letting people waltz into our country and accepting people who come here disrespecting our laws. And I think that's where we've got to go. And I think the mayor needs to be more forceful on that approach, but he's trying to dance along the tightrope of Democratic left-leaning policies and then trying to be moderate so that he has a good chance of getting reelected, which I think is an uphill battle.
Well, President Trump issued a new memo directing federal agencies to prepare for large-scale reductions in force and develop reorganization plans by March 13th. The president's also giving federal agencies a deadline of April 14th to submit plans to move offices and bureaus out of D.C. to, quote, less costly parts of the country. Good idea, Don? How do you view all of these cuts from DOJ?
Well, I think it's an excellent idea. Historically, I mean, administrations, especially more moderate administrations, even Bill Clinton came into office with the idea to cut the bloated bureaucracy. Very few administrations were willing to do what was necessary. I think that the fact that 90% of the federal government workers don't come into work every day in Washington, D.C.'s metro area is indicative that there's a bloated bureaucracy and there can be significant cuts. And why in the world would we be paying for 90% of the office space? I mean, that equates to about 50 million square feet of office space in D.C. metro that's not being used. And so I agree with what he's doing. And if he can get it done, it would be transformative. And I think we have a government that's much more nimble, more responsive, and less burdensome to the American public and taxpayers.
So assess the situation for us on real estate. We were just on set talking about the fact that mortgage rates are still pretty high, 6.99% at last check. That has hurt the real estate business. A lot of people say nothing is moving in New York. How do you compare New York to Florida? And I realize it depends on the area. Geography is very important here. But what can you tell us about the state of real estate today, commercial and residential?
Well, look, let's go to Florida first. Florida's been the bright spot for quite some time, especially during COVID. But Florida has slowed down significantly. Commercial office space has slowed down in terms of consumption, and also the residential market has slowed down considerably, especially existing condominiums. I think that existing buildings in South Florida to buy as an owner or user of a residential condo, there's never a better time to buy existing, because there's an oversupply. Single-family houses, they're down too. New York has begun to have a little bit of a bright spot in terms of residential real estate in Manhattan. Condo prices are picking up a bit. The velocity's picking up a little bit as well. People are coming back to work because the leaders like Jamie Dimon and others are pressing their workers to come back. So I think we're beginning to see a bottoming out of New York. The big threat for New York is, where does the city go? I mean, it needs leadership that can hit the ground running. It needs leadership that can address these crises, and I think then we've got a good day ahead for New York in the next year. So,
in 1 year from today, do you think mortgage rates will be lower?
Yes, I do. I think that President Trump, frankly, I believe that the president should be able to replace the Federal Reserve Board chair. I think that the public has elected him to implement policies to turn the economy around.
Well, it's a good point that you bring up, because I was just talking about this yesterday, and a source tells me that Jay Powell is pushing back on all these cuts. He's not naming a vice chairman, trying to take, on more responsibilities himself, because the person he would put in there would be Michelle Bowman, and she's in step with the Trump agenda. Is that what's going on here? Why is Jay Powell pushing back on the DOJ cuts and getting the Federal Reserve to make the cuts that everybody else is?
Well, indicative of why the president should have the right to name the chairperson of the Federal Reserve Board. I mean, he's not president. Powell's not been elected by anybody, and President Trump has been, and the American people have spoken, and they expect change. Yeah. But one of the handcuffs on Donald Trump is the Federal Reserve. But ultimately, I think that they capitulate because there are other members, and the economy is showing that rates need to go down.
Yeah, no, just to be clear, I'm talking about the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. That person oversees the bank regulations. Yes. And he's yet to name that person. Powell has yet to name that person, and people expect Michelle Bowman to take the job, but he so far has pushed back and taken on more responsibilities himself. So do you see that as Jay Powell pushing back against President Trump's themes to cut back and slim down government?
Yes, absolutely, and to reduce regulations. I mean, I think that the president has been clear on what he wants to do, and Powell has been as well.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Don, it's great to have you this morning. Thank you, sir.